eventually step couples tend to give up because the house rules become just too much.
Right.
They're exhausted. They aren't able to stay consistent. Kids can easily become overwhelmed when there's too many changes, especially kids who haven't had a lot of expectations in the past. And that brings about a whole lot of pushback from the kids, which can cause the bio parent to retreat back to their old ways and then just start to disregard the new rules altogether. Right? So instead of focusing on lots and lots and lots of rules, we encourage blended couples to focus on their mutually agreed upon values. Welcome to the Blended Family Breakthrough Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike and Kim.
We believe in a world where blended families can experience a future full of hope, connection, and peace.
That's why we offer tools, strategies, and guidance that move you from a place of confusion and conflict to experiencing a life of confidence and connection.
We're so glad you're joining us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations as we cover everything from romance to parenting, and yes, even dealing with that difficult ex.
So if you're ready to experience breakthrough in your blended family, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Well, hey there, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are very excited to hop into a subject that we haven't talked directly about in quite a while. And it's one that we know is important to just about every step couple that we meet. Now, before we hop into that, we're wondering if you've left a rating and a review of the show yet.
Yeah.
If you haven't, we would really appreciate hearing from you. Would you be willing to just tap that 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to let us know that we're serving you well? And then take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You know, your feedback is certainly an encouragement to us.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it can help other couples just like you decide which resources to invest their time in. So if you've benefited from the show, why not pass that along and help someone else to engage as well?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks in advance for sharing your thoughts with us today. We really appreciate it. All right, hon. Well, what do you say we go ahead and get started?
Yep, that sounds like a great idea. Now, over the past 22 years, as we've navigated our own blend and connected with hundreds of other couples striving to blend well, we've come to the conclusion that one of the most difficult challenges for blended family couples is learning to build their parenting partnership.
Absolutely, that's true. I mean, I'd say that at least 85% of the couples who reach out to us for help are doing so because they're struggling to get on the same page when it comes to parenting. You know, we've heard all kinds of things that different couples express about the struggles they're having around parenting.
Right.
We hear things like, I just never feel supported when it comes to parenting. Or, we always align with our respective kids and not really together as a couple.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Or his kids treat me with disrespect and it turns into us arguing. Right? I wonder if anybody can relate to that. Or even sometimes we just give up. We say, man, I got to bow out of parenting decisions no matter how I feel.
Yeah.
Or things like we're trying to be fair, not making any of the kids feel left out, but there's a double standard growing. Or even how will we ever be able to show the kids that the expectations in our home are the same for everyone?
Right.
Or we also hear we'll never be able to merge our two types of parenting. Our styles are just so different.
Yeah.
Right? And those are just a few things we hear.
Oh, and each one of these couples are expressing pain, right? They're confused and they're starting to realize that if they aren't able to build a healthy parenting partnership, their pain and struggle is just going to get worse. And they're right.
Right.
All too often, a lack of real partnership turns into a parting. And I don't just mean a parting between them as in breaking off their relationship or ending their marriage.
Yeah.
It can also mean a parting in parenting.
Yeah, they kind of part and stay together, right?
Yeah.
And that leads lots of couples to say something like, well, they can just deal with their own kids and I'll deal with mine.
Right.
Now, this might sound like an easy fix to a complex problem, but this approach is just eventually going to backfire.
Right.
and it might even make things worse.
Exactly. But let's circle back to the statement made about merging two types of parenting when our styles are so different. These are the couples who are wondering, how can we ever build our parenting partnership when we each have individual parenting practices, specific ways of doing life with our respective kids that just don't seem to match up?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest pain points tend to emerge around expectations, discipline, and certainly consequences, or kind of how each partner goes about teaching their kids appropriate behavior. If we take it a step further, often partners have very different ideas around what is appropriate behavior and what is not.
Exactly.
Right?
Which is why this topic is so complicated and challenging. We all have kids living in our homes who might be well-mannered, helpful, kind, and respectful on some days, and they might also be loud, demanding, annoying, defiant, disrespectful, and lazy on other days.
Isn't that the truth?
And when one partner observes what they believe is poor behavior, usually it's a step-parent,
Yep.
the bio parent might not have even noticed that behavior or care about it. This is common because each partner is coming into their blend with their own individual parenting practices around what's acceptable behavior and what's correctable behavior. And often they're on two different pages.
Totally different pages. Yeah. What we're talking about here are parenting styles. Now, psychologist Diana Baumrind is known for her work around parenting styles, and she describes the common ways that parents try to influence their kids or respond to the kids' behavior. So let's talk about those different parenting styles for just a moment.
Yeah.
One of the ones she identifies is the permissive parent. And permissive parents tend to be reluctant to impose rules or standards, and they just kind of prefer to let the kids regulate themselves. Okay. On the other side of that are the authoritarian parents, and they tend to demand obedience from their kids. So they use some harsh punishments, sometimes even fear or shame, to coerce their kids into compliance. That's kind of what I grew up with. We'll talk about that later. But then there's the authoritative parent, and authoritative parents are very, very different than authoritarian parents.
Right.
Authoritative parents set and enforce high standards for their kids while emotionally responding to them with care and respect. They do that at the same time. This parenting style is equally firm and loving.
Right. And according to step family expert Patricia Papernow, the authoritative parenting style is the best predictor of better outcomes for children on every measure imaginable, including their emotional well-being, social competence, academic performance, and general behavior.
Right.
There's a massive amount of research that confirms this in all family forms.
Right.
Never divorced families, single parent homes, and step families.
Yes, but here's the challenge most blended couples face. How to build a parenting partnership that's focused on authoritative parenting. When one partner leans toward permissive and the other possibly more toward authoritarian,
Right.
this certainly is a challenge, right? And that's something that impacted us early on, honey.
Of course.
You had some parenting practices with Annika that I would say fit into the permissive style. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like many post-divorce parents, I was experiencing difficult emotions, mainly guilt, which impacted my parenting.
Yeah.
I felt sorry for my daughter, Annika, and everything that she'd been through, and I wanted to protect her from any kind of struggle or do anything that would be upsetting to her. So I did not have very clear expectations around her behavior, and over time, she grew to be pretty disrespectful. She was sometimes really hard to be around. I was also dealing with some fear, which was rooted around my ex and the time that Annika spent with him, as well as feelings of insecurity around how to effectively discipline Annika.
Yeah.
For the most part, I wasn't even attempting to correct poor behavior. And by the time we got together, honey, Annika had a lot of unhealthy power and control.
Yeah.
She was calling all the shots in our home, and I really didn't have a lot of parental authority with her.
Yeah, and as I was observing Annika's behavior, I had some legitimate concerns. She tended to act disrespectfully and irresponsibly, and anytime she didn't get her way, a huge tantrum tended to get thrown until you would eventually give in to her demands.
Right.
So as I'm watching the two of you, I'm thinking, man, this is going to lead to real trouble if we don't get a handle on this kid. And if Kim isn't able to step up her parenting and right the ship, I guess it's up to me.
Right.
And this is where many step parents tend to take an easy wrong turn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When they make these observations that they perceive as permissive parenting happening in their home, they quickly lean toward the authoritarian style to compensate for their partner's permissiveness, and they might turn into a bit of a dictator, sometimes with their partner, pointing out every little parenting misstep and pressuring them to do something about their kids' behavior.
Yep.
Or sometimes they become overly directive with their stepkids, correcting and disciplining around behaviors that had been acceptable for these kids prior to the family's blend.
Right.
And either way, they really aren't righting the ship. They're about to sink it. So let's give an example of how this dynamic and the differences in parenting practices lead to some complex problems.
Yeah, sure. One couple described their struggle with parenting like this. The husband, we'll call him Bryce, had a few established expectations with his kids. They weren't allowed to leave the dinner table until they'd eaten everything on their plate. And he wanted to teach his kids not to be wasteful, to have some economic awareness. Bryce worked really hard to provide food, and he refused to throw food away. Now, Bryce also required his kids to clear the table after dinner was over and help with the dishes. So he wanted his kids to learn the value of contributing to the household.
Right. Now, the wife, we'll call her Mandy, she had a different focus around the dinner table. She wanted to teach her kids the value of physical awareness and to mindfully consume only what their bodies needed.
Yeah.
It was her understanding that forcing kids to eat could lead to eating disorders. She had no problem throwing uneaten food away, especially if it meant protecting her kids from future harm. And Mandy had never asked her kids to help with cleanup after dinner, but excused them to go work on their homework at that time.
So the question is, who's right and who's wrong?
I'd say that both Bryce and Mandy have valid perspectives. No one's necessarily right or wrong here.
Yep.
They're just different in what they each value and how they want to teach and lead their kids.
Right. So let's imagine how Bryce and Mandy might unintentionally make some easy wrong turns as they approach this dilemma.
Right.
We've heard so many stories over the years that are really similar to this. Now, it's possible that Bryce might decide that his way is the right way and that Mandy is just too darn permissive with her kids. They should be eating their food and pitching in with cleanup.
Right.
Right. So, out of instinct, he just kind of starts to make comments to Mandy like, why can't your kids finish their dinner? They shouldn't be leaving food on their plate. It's such a waste. Or, what the heck is the deal with your kids just kind of taking off to their rooms after dinner? They really need to be cleaning up and pitching in. The problem is Bryce's critical comments about Mandy's kids is his attempt to get her to adopt his parenting practices. He's locked in his side.
Right.
So, honey, how do you think that might play out for this particular couple?
Well, I know that when you tried this approach with me, it did not play out well at all.
I agree.
I felt attacked and also a tremendous amount of pressure to fix Annika. I also experienced feeling hurt, inadequate, and overwhelmed. I got defensive and ended up telling you to butt out and leave me alone.
I remember that.
I'm sure you do.
So it sounds like my approach, which was very similar to Bryce's, felt more like a criticism about your parenting as opposed to a complaint about Annika's behavior. And it really didn't encourage you to do things my way or even help us to build an effective parenting partnership. Is that right?
Absolutely not. In fact, it did just the opposite.
Yeah.
I started to distrust you because you didn't seem to understand my perspective or have empathy for where I was at in my parenting journey.
Yeah.
I just felt judged and misunderstood.
Yeah. So I guess in a way, I kind of became the enemy when it came to parenting Annika at that point.
Certainly when it came to addressing her behavior or disciplining.
I see.
And I'm pretty sure Mandy would feel the same way if Bryce took this approach.
So do you think that would be the case even if Bryce's intentions were good? Like he just wanted her kids to learn the value of money and contributing to the household.
I doubt she would have even cared about that if, if his approach with her was this attitude of you need to fix your kids or I disagree with how you've been parenting. It's all wrong. When you were acting that way with me, it pushed me into feeling like a trapped teammate.
Yeah. Okay.
Painful.
So that didn't work out very well.
No.
Yeah. So what if Bryce perceives Mandy as being a bit too permissive and in his desire to raise responsible stepkids, which is a good desire, he actually decides to get directly with her kids.
Right.
And he starts making it clear that he expects the same behaviors from them as he requires from his own kids. Bryce might be thinking to himself, well, if Mandy isn't willing to parent properly, then I'll just have to jump in and I'll take care of things. So he starts trying to pressure her kids into eating everything on their plate. And he says, hey, get back here and help us clean up the dinner dishes. Like, how do you think his wife and his stepkids might respond to that approach?
Well, Mandy will probably go into protection mode over her kids. That's what I would do.
Yeah, yeah. And what does that look like? Like, how would you do that?
Well, first, I would let you know that this isn't your job or your place to set and require new expectations or behaviors from my kids.
So what I just heard is I'm wanting you to put your kids in your place, but instead you're telling me I need to be put in my place.
Something like that. Yeah. Basically, I'm going to say it's fine if that's what you want to do with your kids, but my kids are off limits.
Yeah.
And then I'd probably stand even more firm in my own parenting practices with my kids.
So you'd kind of dig your heels in even deeper and think, okay, well, your way's the right way.
Yeah.
And then what about the kids? Like, how do you think they would respond to Bryce's approach?
Well, if Bryce continues to administer direction and correction, it will most likely have a negative, maybe even a devastating impact on his relationship with his stepkids because he suddenly becomes this demanding bad guy who expects them to do things they've never had to do before.
Yeah.
It's very negative.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is where you might hear a stepchild say something like, you're not my dad. I don't have to listen to you.
Right.
When that kind of thing happens, it's pretty natural for ongoing, unproductive, ugly power struggles to emerge in these step relationships.
Right.
You know, battle lines get drawn, defenses go up, tensions rise. And when that happens, nobody wins.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, the couple has parted in their parenting, and each set of kids has different expectations, which, of course, they all notice as these double standards emerge and resentment builds between everyone, between step parents and step kids, likely between step siblings, and of course, between the couple.
Doesn't sound like a recipe for a relaxing, happy family meal.
No.
Or really a blended family connection at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the question is, what can we do about that? We're going to offer a couple of ideas to improve all of this and build an effective parenting partnership today. But before we get to that, let's flip our example and offer another possible outcome. What would happen if Bryce realized that his approach isn't working? So he decides to shift his focus to be more understanding. He respectfully shares his concerns with Mandy and asks if they might explore ways to get more united in their parenting.
Yeah, Bryce sounds like a pretty nice guy. Yeah.
But now let's say that Mandy has drawn some conclusions about Bryce. She sees him as too much of an authoritarian, and she firmly believes her way is the right way to parent. So she refuses to listen to his perspective and isn't interested in moving forward towards unity with Bryce. She's not about to consider making any changes to her parenting practices. So, honey, how do you think Bryce might feel or respond if this were the case?
Well, if I put myself in Bryce's shoes, which I can relate to because it's pretty parallel to our experience,
Yes.
I'd just be angry and frustrated.
Right.
You know, I'd feel unheard. I'd probably feel disrespected and devalued. And for me, a big pain point is feeling abandoned.
Yeah. So if you were hoping to work together to build an effective parenting partnership, and let's just say that I shut you down
Yep.
and I stayed stuck in my just butt out attitude, how would this have impacted your relationship with me and with Annika if I had stayed stuck there?
Oh, well, my anger and frustration definitely would increase. And actually it did back when we were in this stage. I would have felt like a stranded stranger. And over time, I probably would have defaulted to a place of harsh judgment toward you. I would probably label you as an ineffective parent or a pushover who coddles her child. My relationship with Annika probably would be filled with harsh judgment as well and some resentment. And, you know, I hate to admit it, but sometimes when I'm in that mode, I can definitely come up with some negative labels for everybody.
Right. And this would have impacted your sense of connection and trust and satisfaction in our marriage. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, when we were struggling with all of this, it greatly impacted our relationship. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that it would have impacted your openness to connect with Annika and build a solid, loving bond with her as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we give this simple yet complicated example of how couples often react or attempt to solve the dilemma of their different parenting styles because we can relate to this struggle. We've lived it, and we're guessing that you might also relate to this kind of dilemma around parenting. But the reality is, in the bigger picture of a blended family, it really doesn't matter who's more permissive and who's more of an authoritarian parent. Don't get lost in the weeds or stuck over arguing who's right and who's wrong. Ultimately, that's not going to get you anywhere. And as we all know, even though most of us deal with some kind of dinner table drama, there are much bigger dilemmas when it comes to raising kids, especially as we navigate the teen years.
Yeah.
The truth is, to overcome this challenge and grow your parenting partnership, there are just two key elements to focus on that could change everything for you.
That's right. The first key is to move together toward the authoritative parenting style. The second is to be really intentional about building your parenting partnership.
Right.
So let's talk about a few practical steps that you can take as a couple to achieve these two key elements. And you can start to solve that dilemma around those different parenting styles and different parenting practices. Now, the first key is to move toward the authoritative parenting style together. We mentioned earlier that a whole body of research reveals the best outcomes for kids are those kids who experience authoritative parenting. Every parent needs to grasp that and accept that authoritative parenting, being both firm and loving at the same time, is the best style of parenting. Research shows it. And every one of us has things that we need to work on in order to become the authoritative parent that are going to set our kids up for success.
Right.
We all have stuff to work on. We don't need to argue about which one of you is right or which one of you is wrong, because the truth is that authoritative parenting is the best approach for all of us across the board.
Yeah, it's right.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't mean that we aren't mindful about how we tailor our parenting approach with each individual child in our home, from their individual personality types to neurodivergences that need to be understood. Every child is unique, and we must consider that. Plus, we all need to adjust the way we live out authoritative parenting through each stage of our children's development. But in general, an authoritative approach is the goal.
Right.
But before we go further, it's important to identify your individual parenting style.
Yeah. What do you lean toward?
Right. In the example we shared, Bryce assumed his wife was permissive and Mandy assumed her husband was authoritarian. But often, when we realize we're not on the same page and we experience emotional pain, we tend to make some assumptions and we start to label each other.
Yeah, that's what Bryce and Mandy were doing. It's an easy thing to do. You and I did that as well.
Exactly.
But in reality, both these parents actually wanted to teach good things to their kids. Both of their perspectives were valid. However, if our goal is to move toward the authoritative style of parenting, first we need to gain some awareness around our current style of parenting, right? We need to know where we're at if we want to get to where we want to go. Now, I was raised with authoritarian parents. And so for me, that's kind of what I naturally leaned into, kind of being more of a dictator.
Yeah, and I was raised in a home that was more permissive, and that's my tendency, especially after my divorce when I struggled with guilt and fear. There are many things that can impact the lens through which we parent, and we need to open up our awareness before we can make any real progress around this topic, right?
Yeah. So we've each had to become aware of our own tendencies and learn how to move together toward authoritative parenting. And not just with Annika. I mean, that's true early on, but that was really beneficial for our mutual kids as well, Phoebe and Jacob. We had to learn this. And we had to stop spending so much time labeling each other and start focusing on dealing with our own tendencies. Now, if you aren't sure about your own tendencies, or if you think you kind of know what yours is or your partner's parenting style might be, we encourage you to confirm rather than guess. Okay.
Right.
Don't get stuck in your own assumptions or labels, or even get stuck in your own style. And to help you do that, we've put a link in the show notes to an online quiz. It's really simple. You just need to honestly answer a few questions, be honest, and then the results are going to help you. And this is a critical starting point.
Yeah. And here's what you need to understand. Regardless of the quiz results that you get, anyone can change their parenting style.
Yep.
You're not stuck in what you were raised with in your family of origin or how you've done things in the past. If we were able to move towards authoritative parenting together, you can too.
Right.
For us, this was a process. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident.
Right.
We had to invest in learning new ways to approach parenting, and then practice.
And blunder along the way.
Exactly. The most impactful resource for us was a parenting method called Love and Logic. I was able to gain new skills, which increased my confidence in setting firm, healthy limits with Annika and following through with appropriate consequences when necessary.
And Love and Logic also helped me to be more empathetic when our kids made mistakes. I started to learn how to guide them toward better behavior from a more loving stance, rather than just demanding compliance from them in the moment.
Right.
And by the way, Love and Logic has a really helpful book specifically for step parents. And back in episode 158, we actually talked about that resource. And so we'll link to that in the show notes as well as the quiz.
This first key element, moving together towards authoritative parenting, is something every parent and step parent needs to talk through and do something about. Take action. It'll provide the best possible foundation to build your parenting partnership on.
Right.
Now, maybe you take the quiz and it reveals that you already lean towards authoritative parenting. That's great. And we challenge you to keep learning and growing as a parent, because there is no such thing as a perfect parent.
Yeah.
And we can all improve.
Yeah.
And if you took the quiz and feel like you need some help moving towards authoritative parenting together, please reach out to us and schedule a free coaching call. We do a lot of coaching around parenting, you might have noticed if you're a listener. Or you can look for a parenting method that you can both dive into. Just make sure it's based on the authoritative parenting style. We benefited from Love and Logic, but I'm sure there are other resources out there that you might want to explore.
Absolutely. Okay. So the first key element to solving that parenting dilemma is to move toward authoritative parenting together. Bryce and Mandy's struggle, which is a really common one, It resulted in them spending a lot of time labeling and judging each other. And when they got stuck in that who's right, who's wrong kind of game, it led them to a lot of pain and confusion in their home.
Right.
So to break free from those unproductive cycles, you're going to need to take this first key element seriously and be willing to make the investment and make some changes in your parenting. Now, the second key element is to intentionally build your parenting partnership. Now, this is a big topic, but we've got just a few tips to help you kind of get started.
Yeah. And the key word is intentionally.
Right.
We believe that every blended couple genuinely wants to build an effective partnership around parenting, but it takes some work.
Yeah.
And if that's true for you, then you need to sit down together and have an honest discussion or a series of discussions about what you each care most about and what you want for your children and your family. We call this defining your desired destinations.
Yep.
If you're going to lead your step family forward, first, you have to figure out where you want to go. And this is so important because if you aren't intentional about where you're headed as a family, you'll probably end up somewhere you really don't want to be. We call that a default future, which often leads to regrets. And we don't want that for you.
Absolutely. So here are a few crucial things to consider together, okay? You can ask a few questions. Hey, what do we want relationships to look like in our blended family? Or what kind of atmosphere do we want to create in our home? Or what are the values, the character traits, and the life skills that we want to teach and model to our children and our stepchildren? And when you take the time to dive deep into each one of these questions, it's going to require a little bit of a process and it's going to take some time and energy, but your family is worth the investment.
Absolutely.
You've got to get intentional and be communicating and working together in order to explore what's most important to each of you, and then clearly define how you'll lead your family toward those desired destinations. And you've got to do that when you can both connect to talk about goals and action steps, not in the heat of the moment when you're disagreeing about something that has just occurred with one or more of the kids.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Need to be calm.
We have to intentionally set time aside to do this work together.
Now, one reason why this is so important is because blended families are merging two cultures. Each with separate histories, distinct routines, and different priorities and expectations, and of course, different styles of parenting and decision making.
Absolutely.
The goal of the desired destination conversation is to get everything out on the table, the values, character traits, and life skills that each of you are hoping to instill into your kids as they move towards adulthood.
Right.
You're raising adults, not kids. Then you've got to organize and prioritize those desired destinations in a way that honors both of your perspectives and helps you develop a plan to lead your family as a united team towards those desired destinations.
Right.
Now, if you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about creating and implementing a code of conduct for your home. We've talked about that before,
Right.
but we've tweaked that terminology a bit now, and we refer to it as your family values or your family mission statement. But whatever you decide to call it, it should operate as your guidepost when it comes to parenting all the kids in your home. And it's values-based rather than rules-based. And there are a lot of reasons why we encourage this type of approach.
Yeah. First, we need to understand that implementing a whole lot of new rules and expectations could unintentionally create unnecessary tension in step relationships for all kinds of reasons, but primarily because kids will tend to complain and make negative associations. Well, we only have to do this because stepdad wants it. Mom never cared about this before he came along, right? So we need to be mindful. That way we can protect step relationships as they grow over time.
Right. And, a big, long list of do's and don'ts will quickly overwhelm the bio parent because they're the one who has to enforce all the new rules with their kids. This can be especially tough when they have limited time with their kids and they don't want to consistently be the rule police.
Yeah.
And if the bio parent doesn't fully agree or believe in the new rules because they're based in what their partner wants to see happen, they're just kind of going along with it, well, they simply won't have the capacity to enforce all these rules with consistency.
Right.
And of course, this inevitably creates conflict because the bio parent may not be enforcing or following through in the way that the step parent thinks they should be.
That's true.
But if you haven't started out on the same page and discussed what's most important to each of you and where you're headed, there will most likely be a lot of conflict between the two of you because you're working from two different playbooks.
That's right. Eventually, step couples tend to give up because the house rules become just too much.
Right.
They're exhausted. They aren't able to stay consistent. Kids can easily become overwhelmed when there's too many changes and too many rules to keep track of, especially kids who haven't had a lot of expectations in the past. And that brings about a whole lot of pushback from the kids, which can cause the bio parent to retreat back to their old ways and then just start to disregard the new rules altogether. Right? So instead of focusing on lots and lots and lots of rules, we encourage blended couples to focus on their mutually agreed upon values.
Right.
Now, how do you do this? By defining your desired destinations and getting really clear about who you want to become as a family and how you will lead your home as partners based on your values.
Right. Time and time again, we see couples struggling to get on the same page around parenting because they've neglected this critical step. They're trying to lead their family from two different perspectives, and their priorities, they aren't aligned.
Right.
They waste a lot of time and energy battling each other for control, just like Bryce and Mandy, and just like us.
Yep.
As a result, the whole family ends up feeling confused and disconnected. And when there's this parting in parenting, they probably aren't going to get to where they really want to be, and they could end up experiencing that default future filled with some regret.
Yeah. So instead of getting stuck there, we suggest that you start by emphasizing what you already have in common and focusing on your shared values. What might be different for you if you took some intentional time to focus on those values that you already agree on? So let's talk about a few tips to help you get started.
Right. Identify and validate each other's strengths. Whether you lean more towards permissive or authoritarian parenting, each of you has value to bring to the table as you consider what you want for your family. Step parents are often more objective. They can help a bio parent work through parental blind spots, which we all have, and expand their parental goals.
Right.
Bio parents have detailed understanding of their children, the history, personality traits, and unique struggles and perspectives that need to be considered as you map out your family values. One expert, Heather Hetchler, says this: a parent looks at their kids through the lens of love first, a step parent through the lens of responsibility first. The view can be very different.
Yeah.
But this isn't always a bad thing. Your unique lenses can be beneficial as you work toward building your parenting partnership. Honey, when you shared your concerns about Annika's behavior with me through your unique lens of responsibility, it was coming from a good place.
Yeah, sure.
Your desired destination for her was to grow up to be a responsible and capable young lady, right? To develop good, solid character.
Yeah, that's really true. Just my delivery kind of stunk. Right?
For a while.
For a while, yeah. Now, your lens of love toward Annika kind of helped me to understand her unique struggles. And I also started gaining some valuable insight into the challenging kind of post-divorce dynamics between the two of you. So I had to stop and listen for a little while.
Right.
So any couple can start out by identifying your strengths and really focusing on the common ground that already exists. Now, as it turns out, hon, you also believed that responsibility was an important value for our family. It's not like you didn't want that. You wanted Annika and your parenting to grow so that we could achieve that desired destination of responsibility to really raise responsible kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Like most couples, we discovered that we had more common ground than we thought.
Absolutely. Now, as you have this conversation, okay, if you're thinking about, you're listening to us and you're thinking, okay, we really need to have that conversation, you're also going to want to identify your own personal struggles, the difficult emotions that tend to get stirred up and the challenges that you're each dealing with when it comes to parenting and step-parenting. And it might be hard, but you got to learn to be honest and open with each other and really choose to focus on listening and validating each other's pain and struggle, even if you don't fully understand your spouse's experience.
Yeah, that's right. Honey, when you really listened to my emotional struggles with guilt and fear and helped me to process through that, I felt understood and supported. The pressure I experienced before, it started to dissipate as your empathy increased. It felt like you were my teammate. You were on my side instead of my enemy. And when that shift occurred, that's when I was able to refocus my energy on moving from permissive to authoritative parenting. I wasn't stuck anymore.
And when you were able to listen to my concerns and how Annika's behavior kind of made me feel, as well as my worries about what would happen for her if we didn't begin to teach her some new behaviors, and you validated all that for me, my anger and my frustration started to dissipate as well. And I became more open to supporting you in your parenting instead of trying to fix you or fix Annika or make unreasonable demands, which I'm really good at all those things, by the way. And here's a little pro tip for this. Drop the labels that you may have put on your partner or their kids and let go of your assumptions. You've got to learn to forgive if you need to forgive for something. You got to learn to ask for forgiveness if you need to be forgiven.
Yeah, be willing to apologize.
Absolutely. You got to do whatever you need to do to clear the air and get back to kind of starting with a clean slate, I guess.
Yeah. Those negative labels, they build negative stories in our heads about each other.
Yep.
And our stories are fueled by painful interactions that we've experienced in the past or maybe even more recently.
Right.
We all need to be willing to release those things so that we can lay the groundwork for a new parenting partnership to emerge. Don't allow resentment and pain from the past to keep you from moving forward towards something much better. And one more pro tip with this. When your partner shares their personal pain and concerns with you, don't get defensive or take things personally. That was a tough one for me. It's not the people in your blended family causing the problems. It's the challenging dynamics. That's the truth. Unfortunately, a temperamental, easily offended partner ends up shooting themselves in the foot because this reaction will not promote emotional safety or the kind of honest communication that's necessary.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to speak openly and really hear and honor each other's experience without getting hijacked by conflict, right?
For sure.
And if you need help regulating your difficult emotions and creating a safe space to share, or if conflict in your relationship tends to escalate quickly and it's difficult to talk about hard things, please reach out and schedule a call with us. We've got some amazing tools that can help you regulate your emotions and stay connected, even when you're discussing these sensitive topics.
That's right. Okay, so we've thrown a lot at you, but let's circle back around to Bryce and Mandy's parenting dilemma. When they were able to let go of their assumptions around each other's parenting and agree to move toward authoritative parenting together, they were each able to improve their individual parenting approach and move toward unity. Then they started engaging in conversations and began talking about the desired destinations that they really wanted. They were able to appreciate each other's strengths, honor their unique perspectives, and land on some common ground in their values.
That's right. As it turns out, teamwork, economical awareness, physical health, and responsibility were some of the family values they prioritized.
That's right.
As they identified these things together, they were able to work as a team to strategize how they were going to lead their family towards these values. They utilized healthy communication skills and problem solving, and eventually came to some agreement of how they'd handle their dinner table differences. They were each willing to make some adjustments based on their values and unite around an authoritative parenting approach.
That's right. They agreed to some reasonable expectations for all the kids. One was that each child would dish up their own food at the table and mindfully eat what they've dished up. Kids weren't required to necessarily clear their plates, but they were encouraged to only take what they could eat so that food wouldn't be wasted.
Right.
Leftovers could be stored, they could eat those later, and that all reflected their values of physical health and economical awareness.
They also agreed that the kids would take turns or rotate clearing the table and cleaning dishes after dinner, which upheld their values of teamwork and responsibility.
Yeah. Once the two of them got aligned, they each set some new expectations with their bio kids in a positive way without throwing the step parent under the bus. They really experienced partnership. Now, keep in mind that if the kids don't know what the expectations are, you can't expect kids to follow your expectations.
Right.
And new expectations can be communicated and enforced from an authoritative approach that's both firm and loving, right? We all need to keep moving toward that.
Yeah, Mandy was able to explain the value of teamwork to her kids and set an expectation around dinner cleanup.
That's right. And Bryce explained the value of physical health to the kids, and he set a new expectation around meal consumption that was really focused on, hey, look, guys, I don't want to keep forcing you to eat everything on your plate, but you're going to dish up what you can eat. Yeah.
Over time, this couple, just like us, intentionally built their parenting partnership by determining their desired destinations based on those three crucial questions. What do you want relationships to look like in your blended family? What kind of atmosphere do you want to create in your home? And what are the values, character traits, and life skills that you want to teach and model to your children and your stepchildren?
That's right. So Bryce and Mandy worked together to decide how they were going to live out their shared values and lead their family toward their desired destinations. They did all this as a team, and they stayed focused on using the authoritative parenting style.
As a result, their entire family became united, and they were all headed in the same direction, the right direction for them. Any couple can achieve this and break free from their dilemmas around parenting differences. All it takes is some intentionality and some effort.
Yep. Now, like Kim mentioned earlier, we used this pretty simple example in this episode, but we realize there are bigger, even more complicated issues that come up around parenting.
Of course.
Especially if you've got teenagers living under your roof, or if kids experience very different expectations when they're at their other home. Hey, we get it because we've lived through it.
We have.
And we've helped many blended couples navigate these complex issues while building and maintaining an effective parenting partnership.
Yeah. So if you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or even hopeless, if it feels impossible for you and your partner to even talk about hard things or come close to getting on the same page around parenting, we encourage you to get help.
That's right.
Don't allow your struggle to end up in a parting of any kind. We're here if you'd like to learn more about how we help couples with all of what we've talked about today. We had one wife recently say to us at the end of our coaching time that, this has been so great because we knew this was the kind of work we needed to do and we wanted to do it. We just didn't know how to go about it.
That's right.
And they were so thankful for the third party to help them through it, and also for the accountability that's set up for them so that they could reach that goal. And it's made a huge difference in their family.
Yeah, so if that's something you want, simply click the link in the show notes to schedule a free coaching call with us, and we would be delighted to connect with you.
And speaking of show notes, we've put some links to episodes that go deeper into many of the concepts that we've explored today. So check those out if you're ready to keep learning and growing in your parenting.
Absolutely. Now, you know what? We talked about 3 different types of parenting styles. We talked about the permissive, the authoritarian, kind of the dictator, and the authoritative. But actually, there's one more that we didn't even talk about that's one of the most detrimental ones for kids.
Yep.
And so I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more next week in our Simple Steps. So make sure you're subscribed to the show so that you don't miss that.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks so much for spending today with us. We really appreciate it. And we're going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.